On the 12th of April in the year 2013, I received a call for an emergency dive, a request far removed from the usual forensic and rescue operations I was accustomed to. Normally, when such calls come in, the urgency is palpable, rooted in life-or-death scenarios or the retrieval of vital objects against the ticking clock. But this situation was shrouded in ambiguity. The objective was as clear as mud. The circumstances immediately struck me as catastrophic. Roused from my sleep in the dead of night, the urgency was undeniable, yet details were scarce. Whispered mentions of a geological event floated around, but no one offered a concrete briefing. Responses to my inquiries were met with a frustrating chorus of "I don't knows." I prided myself on knowing almost every professional in my field across the state, but the faces that greeted me that night were strangers, their expressions ashen and unreadable. They transported me to Greenbrier Valley in West Virginia, a remote location transformed bizarrely by a fleet of government vehicles. Among them, I recognized units from the United States Army Corps of Engineers, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, the United States Geological Survey, and the West Virginia Division of Natural Resources. These were just the ones I could identify amidst a sea of unmarked or falsely labeled vehicles, including one audaciously claiming to be a catering service. As I waded through a tumultuous crowd, a chaotic scene unfolded. Frantic individuals barked into phones, while others engaged in heated exchanges. A particular scene caught my eye. A red-faced, middle-aged man, nearly in tears of frustration, gesticulating wildly with papers at a young woman who could only nod and smile in response. Queries began to fly my way, a barrage of logistical questions about my preparation and readiness. Amongst the confusion, familiar faces emerged: Garrett, who had just celebrated his 44th birthday, and Nora, with whom I had shared several rescue dives. They were already gearing up for a cold dive, meticulously checking their equipment. Amidst this, I was handed paperwork to sign, a procedural step amidst the chaos. A stern woman in a professional pantsuit, flanked by USACE representatives, declared a strict 12-hour limit for our operation. This, she emphasized, was private property. Garrett beckoned me over. I sat beside him on a log, hastily preparing for the dive. "Someone needs to talk to me," I insisted, seeking clarity amidst the frenzy. "It's an earthquake," Nora explained succinctly, though her tone suggested something unusual. "It's about the lake," added Garrett, his words heavy with implication. As I geared up, propelled forward by a flurry of questions and hands guiding me, we emerged into a clearing. Before us was the lake, or rather, what was left of it. The water had vanished, leaving behind a barren expanse of earth that starkly defied its natural state. As we approached the desolate expanse of the drained lake, the scene was surreal. Hundreds of seagulls feasted on dying fish, their screeches creating a haunting symphony. Men clad in hazmat suits struggled to disperse them, their efforts hindered by the slippery mud underfoot. In the center of this eerie tableau was a hole, roughly 6 by 4 feet, a solitary pool amidst the barren landscape, surrounded by tables, security tape, and red flags marking its significance. Around this focal point, about a dozen people huddled over laptops, engrossed in calculations and measurements. An anonymous woman emerged beside us, her presence commanding as she ushered us forward. The faint warmth of the approaching dawn brushed against us, signaling the new day. "We're going blind into this dive," she announced with an unsettling calm. "You'll be our eyes and ears in there," she continued, emphasizing the need for constant communication. Garrett, ever the voice of reason, protested, seeing no immediate danger that warranted such urgency. His objection was cut short as the woman, in a startling display of aggression, pushed him into the mud. Her threat was chilling: comply or face dire consequences. Garrett's livelihood, our livelihoods, were on the line. We rushed towards the hole, accompanied by the relentless sound of feasting seagulls. The scent of decay was overpowering, but our masks shielded us from the worst of it. As we prepared, it became evident that we were stepping into the unknown. No dive plan, no knowledge of the conditions we were facing. The extent of our briefing was the size of the cave system uncovered by the quake, an expansive underground labyrinth stretching roughly 350 feet wide and 700 feet deep. Our dive plan was hastily cobbled together. We agreed on a 20-minute dive, followed by a 25-minute interval for resurfacing and depressurization. Air tanks would be rotated, and communication with the surface team was to be maintained. Any sign of trouble, and we would abort the dive immediately. Hand signals were a last resort. Our safety hinged on flawless execution. As we geared up, they handed us hand chisels and self-sealing bags, instructing us to collect samples of everything. The gravity of the situation was dawning on us. An earthquake had unearthed this cave on private property, a site unknown and untouched, possibly for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of years. Theories abounded, with someone even mentioning the Karoo Ice Age, though that seemed far-fetched. This site could be an unprecedented discovery or a wild goose chase. By the time we dipped our toes into the icy water, the countdown had already eaten into our allotted 12 hours. The chill of the water was sharper than expected. As I sat on the edge, my feet submerged in the murky depths, a technician checked my air tanks, his excitement palpable. "You're about to explore uncharted territory," he exclaimed, his envy evident. I exchanged a knowing look with Nora. Exploration came with its risks, and the ocean floor was full of such unknowns. Descending into the murky abyss, the first plunge was disorienting. Visibility was near zero, hindered by swirling mud and dense reeds. It felt like navigating a storm, the cold intensifying with every foot we descended, and tiny particles swirled around us like rain in a squall. A deep sense of unease took root in my chest, the kind that comes from venturing into the unknown. This dive was unlike anything I'd ever undertaken, a journey into a realm where even seasoned divers are advised to tread cautiously. Approximately 25 feet down, we encountered the cave's floor. The surface was rugged, covered in a layer of what seemed like salt crystals. Nora carefully collected a sample as garbled voices crackled through our earpieces. "Go deeper," they instructed. We were explorers charting a course through uncharted territory. We surveyed 3 tunnels branching off into the depths. The first was so narrow, my gear nearly snagged on the walls. After a cautious retreat, we found another passage, more spacious yet still requiring us to crawl more than swim. A voice broke through our comms, warning of seismic activity. Garrett's voice came in clear on the local channel, skeptical about our signal's reliability amidst granite and quartz. We agreed to resurface in 10 minutes, focusing on collecting samples. The tunnel led us to a small cavern, about 15 by 20 feet and 6 feet at its highest. Here, we regrouped, checked our equipment, and continued our sampling. Nora discovered a strange, transparent substance, while Garrett worked on extracting a piece of granite. I noticed a shimmer, initially thinking it was a trick of light on quartz, but I collected it anyway. We couldn't return empty-handed. After our allotted time, we surfaced. The ascent was slow and deliberate, but fruitful. Realistically, reaching the bottom in 12 hours was impossible, but we were hopeful for significant discoveries over multiple dives. On the surface, a crowd of about 50 people awaited us, their curiosity palpable. Hazmat-clad men brought coolers for our samples, and technicians worked on a hookah air hose system, allowing for a deeper second dive. The system could reach 60 feet, with plans for an extension already underway. Despite this, Garrett wisely insisted on refreshing our air tanks as a precaution. As we re-entered the water, the tang of chemical air from the tanks was replaced by the earthy scent of the forest, mingled with the stench of decay and a hint of diesel from nearby generators. We headed straight for the deeper tunnels, our new air hoses acting as lifelines. Navigating 3 more tunnels, we delved deeper, each passageway leading us further into the cave's heart. Our movement was cautious, the hoses keeping us tethered but also limiting our range. Soon enough, we hit the end of our line. Nora radioed for a longer line, but there was no response. Silence hung in the water, a stark reminder of our isolation in this uncharted underground world. As dawn broke above, we realized our signal had faded in the depths. Garrett suggested either surfacing to relay our situation or tugging on the air hose, a risky move Nora quickly dismissed. Our communication was breaking up, static-filled and choppy, a clear sign we needed to resurface. We turned back, but the cave had other plans. A deep, ominous rumbling echoed from below, like the earth itself was trying to start a diesel engine. The walls began to crack, a clear indication of imminent danger. We quickened our pace, but as Nora navigated through the first tunnel, disaster struck. The rock wall, sharp as a blade, shifted with terrifying ease, collapsing the tunnel above us. Our air hoses were severed in an instant, and Nora's foot was gruesomely crushed, sending a mixture of air and bone fragments swirling around us. The chaos was deafening, our world collapsing around us, our comms now filled with fragments of terrified screams. The water's current suddenly changed, pulling us down with relentless force. I shielded my head as I was thrown through the tunnels, hitting the walls repeatedly. My air tank clanged against the rock, and as I gasped for breath, water rushed into my mask. The cut hose meant no more air supply. Blindly crashing against the cave walls, I felt a sharp pain at the back of my head. The impact wasn't deep, but it was enough to disorient me. The camera strapped to my shoulder came loose amidst the turmoil, adding to my disarray. I was spinning uncontrollably, losing all sense of direction and time. The relentless motion bashed me against the rocks repeatedly, blood leaking from my wounds, my body temperature dropping rapidly. The cold was unrelenting, but I couldn't discern if it was from the blood loss or the icy water. I was completely disoriented. Eventually, the turbulent motion ceased, and I found myself floating in an abyssal darkness, unable to determine up from down. My attempts to ascend felt wrong. My arm wouldn't respond properly, and there was too much resistance. Realization dawned. I was upside down. Water pooled in my mask, and I tasted a mix of iron and a strange, sugary flavor. Blood, most likely. Then, something grabbed me. My first instinct was to resist, but my injuries, a strained arm, a dislocated foot, and a deep gash across my thigh, left me weak and shivering. Garrett appeared, signaling me to exhale hard to clear my mask. He quickly reconnected my air tank. At that moment, our eyes met, communicating volumes without words. Garrett had a severe cut above his right eye, blood clouding his mask. With our comms dead, we resorted to hand signals. He checked my mask for damage, signaling to ask if I was okay. I was far from okay, but I signaled back that I could move, albeit slowly. The gravity of our situation was clear. We were deep in a hostile environment, injured, disoriented, and our only way out was through teamwork and sheer resilience. Navigating through the inky darkness, Garrett and I proceeded with utmost caution. Our depth was a mystery, and conserving air was paramount. Our air supply under ideal conditions might last just under an hour. Yet, given our exertions and injuries, it was likely to be much less. We moved hand in hand, ascending slowly. Despite our progress, the enveloping blackness remained unchanged, giving no indication of our location. Suddenly, Garrett halted, his attention fixed on something above us. Following his gaze, I saw them, dozens of small azure blue fish, about 4 inches long. They were eyeless, their faces obscured by thick, octopus-like beaks, darting around with astonishing speed, skillfully avoiding us. Garrett tightened his grip on my hand, a silent agreement to avoid any interaction with these unknown creatures. We continued our ascent, but after about 10 minutes, we hit an impasse, a solid rock ceiling, devoid of any exit. It dawned on me that we might have entered this area horizontally, and now, like flies trapped against a window, we were unable to find our way out. The ceiling stretched out, almost completely flat, offering no clues. Remaining calm was critical. Panic would only hasten our end. Yet, in this vast, dark space, I felt an overwhelming sense of entrapment. Garrett, resourceful as ever, used his chisel to test the environment. He dislodged a few granitic kernels, observing their movement. They drifted slightly to our left, a current. Time was an elusive concept now. My watch was still set to our first dive's time, a frustrating oversight in our rushed preparations. Garrett's watch was broken. I tried not to focus on the time, yet each second felt painfully significant. Finally, the ceiling began to curve, leading to a narrow opening. We squeezed through, exhaling sharply to fit through the tight space, every inch forward a struggle against the weight of the rocks above. Then, miraculously, we broke the surface. It wasn't the open air, but an air pocket, large enough for us to catch our breath if we crouched. I was first to shut off my air supply and clear my mask, followed closely by Garrett. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, we could speak. The air was stale, with a sugary sweetness that filled our lungs. Garrett gasped, theorizing about the lake water being unsettled by the temperature shift from sunrise, causing the movement that had ensnared us. Garrett estimated our depth at a minimum of 300 feet, a daunting realization. Our concern turned to Nora, trapped in the collapsed tunnel above. Garrett believed she might be safe from drowning, but her fate was uncertain. Pain shot through my leg as I gently touched my dislocated foot, knowing I needed to address it despite the agony. Garrett suggested waiting, concerned about my injuries, but resignation wasn't an option for me. "I'm not dying here," I declared, a statement of defiance against our dire situation. We took a moment to gather ourselves, catching our breaths and checking our equipment, preparing for what lay ahead in this subterranean labyrinth. With about 3/4 of our air tanks remaining, we were managing well under the circumstances. However, our cuts and bruises, some potentially requiring stitches, posed a risk in this unknown environment. The threat of bacterial infection loomed in the back of my mind as I shivered uncontrollably, causing concern for Garrett. He kept asking if I felt sleepy, and truth be told, fatigue was setting in, my eyelids growing heavy as each breath strained against my ribs. We submerged again, our gear checked and secure. The tunnels gradually widened, allowing us to crawl through. At intersections, we tried our best to map our route, using remnants of the torn air hose to mark our path, a makeshift breadcrumb trail in case we needed to return to the air pocket. Dead ends were frequent in this labyrinth, each one a blow to our spirits. When a forward path finally presented itself, we faced a tough decision: backtrack to regroup or push forward to conserve time. Every minute spent retracing our steps felt like a loss, yet moving forward carried its own risks. I signaled forward to Garrett, and we proceeded into a vertical shaft that ascended sharply. A slight current pushed against us, a subtle reminder of the increasing water flow. As we ascended, the water shimmered with the rush of azure-colored fish darting past us, following the current. Their origin had to be somewhere above, so we followed. Garrett's squeeze on my hand was a small victory in our dire situation. We reached a network of tunnels in the ceiling, each looking promising. Randomly choosing one, we continued upward. My ability to mark our path was exhausted. I had nothing left to leave behind. Suddenly, Garrett stopped. Ahead, something shimmered in our mask lights. At first, it looked like gemstones or quartz, but then, the horrific realization set in. Eyes, belonging to a nightmarish creature, predatory and devoid of any semblance of empathy. It emerged from the darkness, a grotesque being with long, bone-like arms and needle-sharp teeth, adept at catching the swift azure fish. Its size was immense, yet it moved with terrifying speed, squeezing through the tunnel. This encounter was an aberration, a moment that forever altered my perception of dark, confined spaces. In a panic, I flouted every safety rule I knew. I rushed, gasped, screamed, and forced myself back down the tunnel as fast as I could. The pain in my foot was excruciating, but survival was my only focus. The water's movement echoed my frantic escape, every wave amplifying the agony in my limbs. But at that moment, nothing mattered but the desperate need to escape. Reaching the tunnel's entrance, I glanced back to see Garrett's wide, terrified eyes. In that fleeting moment, his expression conveyed a shared understanding of the horror we had just encountered, a silent acknowledgement of the nightmare that lurked in the depths. Garrett's realization that he was about to die was palpable. His arm was violently torn from its socket by the creature's long, unforgiving fingers. The sound of it snapping echoed through the tunnel, a gruesome symphony accompanied by his death screams. All I could focus on was my frantic breath as I fled through tunnel after tunnel, the shimmering azure fish my only companions in the darkness. My markers were nowhere to be seen. Each jolt of pain from my injured foot brought tears to my eyes, the edge of my nose raw from the crying. I stumbled upon another air pocket, but the fear of those unfeeling eyes and reaching arms drove me on. My air supply began to feel warm and strange, a sign of panic setting in. Finally, reaching another air pocket, I ripped off my mask and shut the air tank. The taste of blood and salt filled my mouth, tears streaming down my face uncontrollably. This pocket was tiny, barely enough space for my head if I tilted it right. My mask light flickered ominously, signaling its imminent failure. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, trying to breathe, lost and cold. The amount of air left in my tank was a mystery, but I knew it wasn't much. To survive, I had to ration it, but I couldn't stay in this place of fear and darkness. No rescue was coming. I was on my own, and with a predator in the tunnels and the risk of freezing to death or bleeding out, my situation was dire. Realizing I was bleeding heightened my panic. I felt a shift in the tunnel below, a pressure that indicated movement. My heart raced, hoping against hope the creature wouldn't find me. I held my breath, feeling the creature's movements in the water approaching me. I closed my eyes tightly, each teardrop echoing like a drum in the silent void. Then, the stroke stopped. It was near. My mask light died completely, leaving me in utter darkness. Moments later, the creature moved past me. Perhaps it wasn't accustomed to hunting humans, or maybe it was taking its prey back to a nest. When it was gone, I coughed violently, the taste of blood overwhelming. With no other option, I had to continue with the scant air I had left. I secured my mask, letting my hands rest in the water momentarily. Floating in that confined space was a surreal, primal experience, unlike anything I'd ever encountered. I took a deep breath and plunged back into the water. In the darkness, I noticed a strange sensation. The current was more perceptible with the lights off. Relying on my other senses, I could feel the right way to go, a circulation from above guiding me. At a branching tunnel, it was harder to determine the right path, but I decided to keep going upward. The current strengthened, and suddenly I breached into another air pocket. Then, a sound caught my attention, a metallic clinking. It didn't take long to locate the source. Finding Garrett's air tank was both a stroke of luck and a chilling reminder of the danger lurking nearby. With a bit of air remaining in my own tank, I pushed forward through the cavernous air pocket, the ankle-deep water making me acutely aware of my own weight and the burden of my equipment. Exhaustion weighed heavily on me. The temptation to lie down, to surrender to sleep or death, was overwhelming. But survival instinct prevailed, and I carried on, conserving my air by holding my breath as long as possible, using the tank's air sparingly. The azure fish continued to rush past me, their behavior ambiguous. Were they fleeing a predator or simply following the current? Hours passed in a blur of caves, passages, and tunnels. I utilized every air pocket I could find, eventually abandoning my own tank and relying on the remnants of Garrett's. Each step felt like a step closer to my grave. Perhaps staying put initially would have been wiser, but the urgency of escape had driven me forward. As I ascended, the air in Garrett's tank began to sour. Breaching another air pocket, I discarded the tank in resignation. The echoing clang of the tank against the cave walls was followed by a soft gasp in the distance. I pressed myself against the wall, hearing large, wet footsteps approaching. The creature's frog-like breathing was hauntingly close. Blood dripped from my arm into the water, but thankfully, it didn't notice me. Instead, I heard a bone snap, followed by the sound of gnawing and eager suckling. Paralyzed with fear, I waited until the creature retreated into a side tunnel. Seizing the opportunity, I hobbled away, only to step on a partly devoured foot, a grim reminder of the creature's presence. My escape became methodical. Follow the current for 30 seconds, turn back if no way forward was found, catch my breath, then try another path. The physical strain was immense, but I was making progress. Eventually, I reached a large vertical chute with a strong upward current. Desperate for escape, I held my breath and ascended, only to be met with a dead end. My frustration and pain were overwhelming, air escaping from my lungs in a silent scream. The surface I hit was unnaturally smooth, metallic. Pounding on the metal, I felt something stirring below. The creature's fingers wrapped around my ankle, pulling me down before I kicked free. In a frantic attempt, I flung myself upward again, the metal surface finally buckling. Light and air flooded in as men removed what appeared to be a makeshift manhole cover, pulling me to safety. My relief was indescribable, manifesting in uncontrollable screams. Nora had survived, airlifted out but having lost a foot. The site was sealed off, with no other diving team available. I had been down there for 9 hours and 37 minutes. A 10-year contract of silence followed, but now that it's expired, I share this harrowing tale. Garrett perished, Nora was maimed, and while I survived, the unseen scars remain. The site, now owned by an investment company called Hatchet, is heavily guarded and fenced off. Since then, I've abandoned diving. The trauma too great even for a simple swim in a pool. And honestly, I'm fine with that. A life away from the depths that almost claimed me.